Hold on to me, Vi. He shouted. Mafia boss pulled the drowning girl from the flood and held her tight. The rain had been falling over Brighton Point for 72 hours straight, a relentless, drumming assault that turned the sky a bruised purple and the streets into slick, shivering rivers. Inside Sal's diner, the air smelled of frying onions, damp wool, and the creeping, metallic scent of the rising canal just 2 blocks east. Hannah Reed wiped down the counter with a rag that had seen better days, her movements rhythmic and practiced. She was in her mid-20s, though the shadows under her eyes made her look older tonight. Her uniform was a pale yellow that had not been stylish since 1995, but it was clean, and right now, it was the only thing standing between her and financial ruin. In her head, she was doing the math for the 3rd time that hour. If she picked up an extra shift on Thursday and the community center didn't need her to buy more bottled water out of pocket, she could pay the electricity bill 2 days late without getting cut off. Maybe. A clap of thunder shook the plate glass windows, rattling the silverware on the empty tables. Hannah flinched. It was a small movement, barely a tremor in her hand, but her chest tightened. She looked toward the window, where the rain was lashing sideways against the glass, beyond the diner lights. The world was a blur of water and darkness. She hated the water. It was not a dislike. It was a visceral, bone-deep terror that she kept locked away behind a cheerful smile and a strong work ethic. It had been 10 years since the boating accident that took her father. 10 years since she had felt the freezing grip of a lake pulling her down while he pushed her up toward the light. She had survived. He had not. Even now, the sound of water rushing through the gutters made her pulse jump. You have to breathe, she told herself, forcing her hand to steady on the countertop. You have to finish this shift because people need help. She was scheduled to head to the Riverside Community Center immediately after work. The low-lying district was already flooding, and families were being evacuated to the gym. They needed blankets, food, and someone to tell them it was going to be all right, even if Hannah was not entirely sure it was true. The bell above the door chimed, cutting through the sound of the storm and the low hum of the refrigerator. The atmosphere in the diner shifted instantly. It was a physical change, like the air pressure dropping before a tornado. The 2 regulars in the back booth stopped talking mid-sentence. Sal, the owner, who'd been scraping the grill, froze with his spatula in midair. 3 men walked in. They brought the cold with them. The 2 men flanking the group were large, their eyes moving constantly, scanning the corners, the kitchen door, and the windows. They wore raincoats that bulged slightly at the waist, but it was the man in the middle who drew Hannah's attention. He was in his early 30s, dressed in a suit that cost more than Hannah would make in 5 years. It was dark, tailored perfectly to his broad shoulders, and ruined by the rain. He did not look around with the paranoid intensity of his companions. He just looked tired. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and his eyes were heavy, carrying a weight that made his handsome face look severe, almost cruel. He walked to the counter and sat on a stool 3 seats down from the register. His men remained standing, blocking the door and the path to the kitchen. Hannah blinked. Realizing she was staring, she grabbed a menu and walked over, forcing her customer service smile into place. Coffee, she guessed. He looks like he hasn't slept in a week. Just coffee, please, the man said before she could speak. His voice was a low baritone, rough around the edges, like gravel wrapped in velvet, black. Coming right up, Hannah said. She turned to the coffee pot, feeling the eyes of the 2 standing men boring into her back. Her hands shook slightly as she poured the steaming liquid into a thick white mug. When she placed it in front of him, he didn't reach for it immediately. He was looking at his hands, which were resting on the laminate counter. They were large hands, scarred across the knuckles, but steady. "Thank you," he said softly. The politeness threw her. The customers who usually came in this late were drunk, rude, or both. She looked at him again. Really looked at him. Under the expensive suit and the aura of danger that had silenced the room, he just seemed like a man carrying the world on his shoulders. "Do you want a menu?" Hannah asked. "The storm is supposed to get worse. You should probably eat something while you can." One of the standing men stepped forward, his hand moving toward his jacket. "Boss, we should keep moving. The South Levee is showing stress fractures." The man on the stool raised a single finger, and the bodyguard stopped instantly, stepping back into the shadows. "I will have the special," the seated man said to Hannah, ignoring his subordinate. "Whatever it is." "Meatloaf," Hannah said. "It is actually pretty good tonight. Sal put extra garlic in the mash. Sounds perfect." As she called the order back to Sal, she noticed the owner's face. Sal was pale, sweat beading on his upper lip. He was cooking faster than she had ever seen him move. "Mr. Vieri," Sal squeaked from the grill. "I will have that right out for you. On the house, please." The man, Vieri, did not turn around. He just took a sip of his coffee. "I pay for what I eat. Sal, you know that." Hannah paused. "Vieri." The name sounded familiar, something she had heard whispered in the neighborhood, usually accompanied by a nervous glance over the shoulder. She looked at the man again. He was eating the meatloaf Sal had practically thrown onto a plate, eating with the precise, mechanical motions of someone fueling a machine rather than enjoying a meal. The local news was playing on the small television mounted in the corner. A reporter in a yellow slicker was shouting over the wind, standing in front of a raging black river that used to be the serene canal running through the city's center. "Emergency alerts are in effect for all residents of Riverside," the reporter shouted. "The Army Corps of Engineers is warning that the old levees may not hold. If you are in the flood zone, get out now. Seek higher ground immediately." Hannah watched the screen, her stomach twisting. The community center was on higher ground, but barely. "Looks bad," Hannah said, leaning against the counter near Vieri's elbow. She did not know why she was talking to him. Maybe it was the silence in the rest of the diner that made her nervous. "My dad used to say the water always takes back what it wants eventually." Vieri stopped eating. He turned his head slowly to look at her. His eyes were dark, almost black, and for a second, she felt like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. There was violence in that gaze, a cold calculation that assessed her threat level in a heartbeat, but then it softened. "Your father was a wise man," Vieri said quietly. "The water has no conscience. It just takes—" He finished his meal in silence. When he stood up, the motion was fluid, like a predator uncoiling. He reached into his jacket pocket, and for a terrifying second, Hannah saw the leather holster strapped to his chest and the dark matte grip of a handgun. Her breath hitched. He pulled out a money clip thick with bills. He peeled off several notes and placed them on the counter. "For the food," he said. "And for the coffee," he placed another stack of bills next to the first. "And this is for everyone else in here. Tell them their meals are covered. They should go home. It is not going to be safe to be on the roads in an hour." Hannah stared at the money. It was hundreds of dollars, more than the diner made in 2 nights. "Sir, that is too much," she started. He looked at her one last time. His expression was unreadable, a mask of weary control. "Get to high ground," he said. "Don't wait." He turned and walked out into the storm, his bodyguards forming a phalanx around him as the door chimed again. "Who was that?" Hannah whispered, staring at the empty stool. Sal hurried over, scooping up the money with trembling hands. That, Hannah, was Luca Vieri, the head of the Vieri family, and if you are smart, you will forget you ever saw him. Hannah looked out the window. A black sedan was pulling away from the curb, its taillights dissolving into the red smear of the rain. 20 minutes later, Hannah was wrapping a scarf around her neck and shoving packs of bottled water into her canvas tote bag. "Hannah, do not be an idiot," Sal said, locking the register. "I will drive you home. My truck has 4-wheel drive." "I am not going home, Sal," Hannah said, tightening her shoelaces. "I have to go to the community center. I promised Mrs. Gable I would help with the intake. There are elderly people there who cannot move their own cots. You cannot walk in this." Sal gestured to the window. The street was already ankle-deep in swirling brown water. Trash cans were floating by. "It is only 6 blocks," Hannah lied. "It was 8. I will stick to the high ridge on 4th Street. I will be fine." Sal looked at her. shaking his head. "You're stubborn. Hannah Reed, just like your father." Hannah smiled, though it felt brittle. "I will take that as a compliment. Go home to your wife, Sal. Be safe." She pushed out the door before he could argue further. The wind hit her like a physical blow. It screamed in her ears, tearing at her coat and stinging her cheeks with needles of rain. The temperature had dropped, and the water swirling around her boots was ice cold. Panic flared in her chest, the cold, dark sensation of the lake, but she forced it down. "Left foot, right foot," she muttered to herself. Head down against the gale. Just keep moving. The city of Brighton Point was dissolving. Streetlights flickered and died as she walked. The sound of the wind was deafening, a constant howling roar that drowned out her own thoughts. But as she turned onto 4th Street, approaching the bridge that spanned the main canal, she heard something else. It was a high-pitched, frantic sound. Hannah stopped, wiping water from her eyes. The canal was to her right, usually a 20-foot drop down a concrete embankment. Now, the water was churning violently just a few feet below the road level, a raging torrent of mud and debris. Barking. She heard it again. Sharp, terrified yelps. Hannah squinted through the gloom. About 30 feet away, a sedan had been abandoned near the guardrail. Half submerged where the drainage had failed, the water was rising around it rapidly. Perched on the roof of the car, shivering and slipping on the wet metal, was a small terrier. "No," Hannah whispered. "No, no, no." She looked around. The street was empty. No cars, no people. Just the storm and the rising water. The dog barked again, looking directly at her. Its eyes reflected the distant street lamp, wide with terror. Hannah took a step back. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The water was rising fast. If she went over there, she would be close to the canal. Too close. The memory of her father's hand slipping from hers flashed in her mind, vivid and terrible. "Walk away!" a voice in her head screamed. "You cannot save everyone." The dog slipped, scrambling frantically to regain its footing on the car roof. It whined, a pitiful, high sound that cut through the wind. "Damn it," Hannah hissed. She dropped her heavy tote bag on the sidewalk and moved toward the car. The water on the road was deeper here, rushing around her calves, heavy and strong. She grabbed the iron railing of the fence that separated the sidewalk from the drop-off. The metal was slick and cold. "It is okay," she called out, though the wind snatched her words away. "I am coming, buddy. Just stay there." She was 10 feet away. The water was at her knees now, tugging at her jeans, trying to pull her off balance. She could feel the vibration of the canal, the sheer power of thousands of gallons of water rushing toward the sea. 5 feet. She reached out a hand. "Come here," she coaxed. The dog was too scared to move. It cowered on the roof, shivering violently. Hannah gritted her teeth. She had to let go of the railing to reach the car. She had to trust her balance in the flood. She took a breath, held it, and let go. She lunged forward, grabbing the door handle of the car to steady herself. The water surged against her waist. She reached for the dog, her fingers brushing its wet fur. "Got you!" she gasped, grabbing the scruff of its neck. At that exact moment, the world ended. There was no warning, just a sound like the earth cracking open. 100 yards upstream, the old concrete levee finally gave up its fight against the river. It crumbled, and a wall of brown water, 6 feet high and moving with the force of a freight train, surged down the street. Hannah didn't even have time to scream. The impact was instantaneous. 1 second she was holding the dog. The next, she was airborne, lifted by the massive hydraulic force and slammed into the darkness. The water was not just water, it was a solid thing, a battering ram of mud, branches, and debris. She swallowed a mouthful of filth, choking as the current dragged her under. She spun wildly, having no idea which way was up. The cold was shocking, paralyzing her limbs. She flailed, her hand striking something hard, concrete, a car, and pain shot up her arm. She broke the surface, gasping for air, but a wave slapped her face, filling her nose with water. She was in the canal now. The street was gone. She was part of the river, being hurled toward the ocean at terrifying speed. "Help!" she screamed. but the water filled her mouth again. She saw the lights of the overpass above her, blurring and spinning. She was going to die. Just like her dad, she was going to die in the cold and the dark. Luca Vieri was driving the black sedan himself. His driver, Marco, was in the passenger seat, white-knuckled as he gripped the handle above the door. "Boss, we have to turn back," Marco shouted over the roar of the rain on the roof. "The bridge is shaking." Luca ignored him. His eyes were fixed on the road ahead, his hands steady on the leather wheel. He needed to get to the warehouse on the east side. There were 3 families sheltering there who hadn't evacuated in time. Families under his protection. He wasn't going to leave them to drown. He slowed the car as they crested the overpass. Below them, the world was chaos. The streetlights reflected off a churning black mass where the road should have been. Suddenly, Luca slammed on the brakes. The car skidded on the wet asphalt, coming to a halt inches from the guardrail. "What is it?" Marco reached for his gun instinctively. "Ambush?" Luca didn't answer. He was staring out the side window, down into the raging canal below. He had seen something, a flash of yellow, a face. "Someone is in the water," Luca said, his voice flat. He popped his seatbelt. "Boss, no!" Marco yelled, grabbing Luca's arm. "You cannot go out there. It is a suicide mission. The current is doing 40 miles an hour. It could be a trap. Snipers could be watching the bridge." "Let go of me," Luca snarled, ripping his arm free. He threw the door open. The wind nearly tore it off its hinges. Luca stepped out into the gale, the rain instantly soaking his shirt. He ran to the railing and looked down. He saw her, a woman, struggling to keep her head above the churning brown sludge. She was being swept toward the concrete pilings of the old pedestrian staircase that led down to the water level, or where the water level used to be. He recognized the yellow uniform, the waitress, the girl with the sad eyes who had given him extra coffee. "Help!" The scream was faint, barely audible over the thunder. Luca didn't think. He didn't calculate the odds. He didn't think about the rival Novak syndicate that wanted him dead, or the federal indictment hanging over his head, or the empire he had built on blood and silence. He tore off his suit jacket and threw it on the wet pavement. "Luca!" Marco was screaming from the car. "Don't do it!" Luca Vieri vaulted over the guardrail. He plummeted 20 feet, hitting the water feet first. The cold was a sledgehammer. The current seized him instantly, tearing at his clothes, trying to drag him down into the silt. He fought it. He had grown up in these waters. He knew how the currents twisted around the bridge pilings. He kicked hard, surfacing and shaking the water from his eyes. He spotted the splash of yellow 5 yards ahead. She was going under, her movements slowing. She was drowning. Luca swam. He swam with a violence born of desperation, cutting through the debris-choked water. A tree branch slammed into his shoulder, bruising the muscle, but he didn't stop. He closed the distance. 3 yards. 2. He reached out, his hand closing around a slender wrist. The woman thrashed, panic-stricken, grabbing at him, trying to climb him like a ladder. It was the instinct of the drowning, dangerous and blind. "Hannah!" he roared, his voice raw, tearing through the noise of the storm. She gasped, her eyes wide, terrified, staring at him but not seeing him. "Hold on to me," he shouted, grabbing her waist with his other arm and pulling her body flush against his. "Do not fight me. Hold on to me." Something in his voice cut through her panic. She stopped thrashing, her arms wrapped around his neck, her fingernails digging into his shoulders through his wet shirt. She buried her face in his neck, sobbing for air. "Got you," Luca grunted. "I have got you!" The current slammed them sideways. Luca spun them around, taking the impact of a floating pallet against his own back to shield her. He gritted his teeth against the pain. He saw the iron railing of the flooded staircase looming out of the dark. It was their only chance. "Hold on!" He kicked with everything he had left, lunging for the metal bars, his hands slapped against the iron, fingers locking tight. The current tried to rip them away, stretching his arm until the shoulder joint popped, but he refused to let go. He hauled them out of the main channel, dragging their combined weight toward the relative safety of the concrete landing. He pulled her up the submerged steps, water crashing over their legs. He didn't stop until they were high enough that the water was only lapping at their boots. He collapsed against the concrete wall, pulling her down with him. They were both gasping, chests heaving, soaked and shivering. Luca looked down at the woman in his arms. Her hair was matted across her face, her yellow uniform ruined with mud. She was shaking violently, coughing up river water, but she was alive. He tightened his grip on her, pulling her closer against his chest, defying the storm to try and take her back. "You are okay," he rasped, brushing a wet strand of hair from her forehead. "You are okay." She looked up at him, her eyes struggling to focus. She blinked, and a single tear mixed with the rain on her cheek. "You," she whispered, her voice a broken croak. The man from the diner. Luca Vieri, the most feared man in Brighton Point, rested his chin on the top of her head and closed his eyes for a second. "Yeah," he breathed. "It is me. I have got you. Just breathe." The concrete landing under the overpass was cold and slick with slime, but to Hannah Reed, it felt like the most beautiful thing in the world simply because it was solid. She collapsed against the graffiti-covered wall, her lungs burning as she heaved up brackish river water. Her body shook with a violence she could not control, her teeth clattering together so hard she thought they might crack. The roar of the storm was muffled here under the heavy concrete span, but the water churned just feet below them. A black, hungry beast that had been cheated of its meal. Luca Vieri did not collapse. He was kneeling beside her instantly, his expensive suit ruined, the white dress shirt clinging to his torso like a second skin. He was breathing hard, deep rhythmic intakes of air that spoke of exertion, but not panic. "Look at me," he ordered. His voice was rough, scraping against the stone walls. Hannah tried to focus. Her vision was swimming, dark spots dancing at the edges. She felt his hands on her, and they were surprisingly warm against her ice-cold skin. One of his hands pressed flat against her back, steadying her as she coughed, while the other moved to her face, brushing the wet, matted hair away from her eyes. "I am looking," she chattered, though her eyes kept sliding shut. "Stay with me," Luca said sharply. His hands were moving now, professional and efficient. He ran his fingers down her arms, checking for breaks, then pressed against her ribs. It was an invasive, intimate examination, his touch firm and commanding. Under any other circumstances, a stranger touching her like this would have made her recoil. But right now, his hands felt like the only things holding her together. When his fingers grazed a bruise forming on her shoulder, she hissed in pain. "Sorry," he murmured, though he did not stop. "Nothing feels broken. You are in shock." He leaned closer, his face inches from hers. Water dripped from his dark hair onto her nose. His eyes were scanning her face with a terrifying intensity, searching for pupil dilation, for signs of a concussion. The sheer force of his focus made heat rise in her cheeks, a sudden, confusing flush that battled against the freezing cold in her veins. "Who are you?" she whispered, her head lolling back against the wall. "Just breathe," he said. The darkness at the edges of her vision surged forward. The adrenaline that had fueled her struggle in the water evaporated, leaving nothing behind but exhaustion. She felt herself slipping, the concrete wall disappearing, the sound of the rain fading into a long, low hum. "Hannah." Luca's voice sounded far away. She let go. She came back to the sensation of tapping. It was rhythmic, gentle but persistent, against her cheek. "Hannah, open your eyes." She forced her eyelids apart. The world was blurry, a smear of gray concrete and flashing red lights. Luca was there. He was crouching over her, his face tight with a flicker of panic that vanished the moment he saw her eyes open. His thumb was resting against the curve of her jaw, right over her pulse point, as if he needed to feel the beat of her heart to reassure himself she was still there. "She is back," Luca said. Hannah realized he wasn't talking to her. A paramedic in a yellow slicker was jogging up the stairs, carrying a heavy orange bag. "I have got her." "Sir," the paramedic said, dropping to his knees. Luca hesitated. For a split second, his hand lingered on her jaw, his thumb brushing the soft skin beneath her ear. Then, slowly, reluctantly, he pulled back and stood up, giving the medic space. Hannah shivered as the warmth of his touch vanished. The medic was asking her questions. What was her name? What day was it? Did she have pain in her neck? But her eyes kept drifting past him, seeking out the dark figure standing near the edge of the landing. Luca stood with his back to the wind. His jacket was gone, lost to the river. His dress shirt was soaked through, turning translucent against his skin. For the first time, Hannah saw the ink, dark. Intricate tattoos covered his arms and curled up his chest, visible through the wet fabric. She couldn't make out the designs in the dim light, but they looked sharp, jagged and tribal. A long, pale scar ran down his left forearm, a jagged line that disrupted the artwork. He looked dangerous. There was no other word for it. Standing there in the gloom, water dripping from his clenched fists, he looked like a creature born of the storm itself. And yet, he was not leaving. The medic wrapped a thermal foil blanket around Hannah's shoulders and pressed an oxygen mask to her face. "Breathe deep. Honey," he said. "We're going to get you into the ambulance and warmed up." Hannah nodded, inhaling the pure, dry oxygen. She watched Luca. He was watching her. His gaze was unwavering, ignoring the chaos of the storm, ignoring the second ambulance pulling up on the overpass above. He was standing guard. A heavy set of footsteps clattered down the stairs. A police officer, his raincoat gleaming under the flashlight attached to his shoulder, descended to the landing. He shone his beam around, the light catching Luca's face. The officer froze. His hand dropped instinctively toward his belt. "Vieri," the cop said. The name was an accusation. "Officer Miller," Luca replied. His voice was calm, utterly void of the panic he had shown moments ago. His posture shifted imperceptibly, his shoulders squaring. "We got a call about a jumper," Miller said, his eyes narrowing. "What are you doing down here, Luca?" "Swimming," Luca said dryly. "Don't play games with me." Miller stepped closer, invading Luca's personal space. Two other uniformed officers were appearing at the top of the stairs now, their hands resting on their holsters. The tension in the small, concrete space spiked. The air suddenly felt charged, sharper than the storm. "I saw a woman go into the water," Luca said, his tone bored, as if explaining something simple to a child. "I pulled her out. That is the beginning and the end of the story." Miller looked from Luca to Hannah, who was being helped onto a stretcher by the paramedics. The cop's face twisted in suspicion. "You expect me to believe you just happened to be passing by?" Miller asked. "With your reputation? I expect you to step out of the way so the EMTs can do their job," Luca said. His voice dropped an octave. "Unless you want to explain to the press why you delayed medical transport for a drowning victim because you wanted to harass a private citizen." Miller's jaw tightened. He glared at Luca for a long, silent moment, the animosity between them thick enough to choke on. Finally, the cop stepped back. "We will talk about this later, Vieri." "I'm sure we will," Luca said. He didn't look at the cop. He was looking at Hannah. The paramedics lifted the stretcher. As they moved her toward the stairs, passing Luca, he stepped forward. "Wait," he said. The paramedics paused. Luca moved to the side of the gurney. He leaned down, ignoring the police officers who were watching his every move. He brought his face close to hers, invading her world again, smelling of rain and expensive cologne, and something distinctly masculine. Hannah looked up at him, her heart hammering against her ribs, up close. The hardness in his eyes fractured. There was depth there, a dark, swirling intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. He reached out and took her hand. His fingers were warm and rough. He pressed a small, rectangular card into her palm and curled her fingers over it. "You are safe," he murmured, his voice so low only she could hear it over the wind. "If you need anything at all, you call." He squeezed her hand once, a firm, reassuring pressure that traveled all the way up her arm and settled in her chest. Then he let go. "Go," Luca said to the paramedics, stepping back into the shadows. As they carried her up the stairs, Hannah turned her head, trying to keep him in sight for as long as possible. He stood alone on the concrete landing, a dark sentinel against the raging gray water, watching her until the ambulance doors closed and shut him out. 3 days later, the sun finally came out. It was a weak, watery sunlight that did little to dry the soaked city of Brighton Point, but it was light nonetheless. The floodwaters in Riverside had receded, leaving behind a thick coating of mud, ruined furniture, and the sour smell of sewage. Hannah sat at the small kitchen table in her second-floor apartment. She was lucky. Her building was on a slight incline, so the water had only flooded the lobby and the basement. Her apartment was dry, though the power had flickered on and off for 48 hours. She was wearing her thickest sweater and wrapping her hands around a mug of tea, but she couldn't seem to get warm. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back in the water. She felt the cold, the suffocating weight of the silt, the terrifying helplessness. And then she felt the hand. She looked down at the table. Lying on the cheap laminate surface was the card. It was heavy, made of thick, cream-colored stock. The edges were embossed. It was simple, elegant, and screamed money. Luca Vieri owner, Il Nido, 555-0192. There was no email address, no social media handle. Just a name and a number. She had turned the card over in her fingers 1,000 times in the last 3 days. She had slept with it on her nightstand. She had traced the raised lettering with her thumb, remembering the feel of his hand on her jaw, the way he had looked at her on the stairs. He was a criminal. The news said so. Sal at the diner had said so. The cop on the landing had treated him like a dangerous animal, but he had jumped. He had jumped into a raging flood to save a waitress he didn't know. He had shielded her body with his own when they slammed against the concrete. He had looked at her with a tenderness that didn't match the scars on his arms. "I have to thank him," she whispered to the empty room. It was a rationalization, and she knew it. She could just call the number. She could send a note. But the thought of never seeing him again, of leaving that moment on the stairwell as the end of the story, felt wrong. It felt unfinished. She stood up, her chair scraping against the linoleum. Her legs were still sore, covered in bruises from the debris in the water. But she was steady. She went to her closet. She didn't have much. She pulled out her best pair of dark jeans and a soft gray sweater that didn't look too worn. She brushed her hair until it shone, trying to tame the waves that the humidity was encouraging. She applied a little mascara, staring at her reflection. She looked pale, her eyes wide and startled, but she looked alive. She grabbed her purse and the card. Il Nido was in the Uptown District, the part of the city that sat on the high bluffs overlooking the bay. It was a 40-minute walk, but the buses weren't running yet. Hannah walked. She walked through the mud-slicked streets of Riverside, past the piles of ruined drywall and sodden mattresses. As she climbed the hill toward Uptown, the devastation faded. The streets here were clean. The trees were still standing. The cars parked on the curbs were luxury sedans, not flooded hatchbacks. It felt like crossing a border between two different worlds. She found the restaurant on a quiet corner lined with oak trees. It was a beautiful building, old stone and ivy, with a discreet sign in gold lettering. Hannah took a deep breath, smoothed her sweater, and pushed open the heavy oak door. The inside was warm and smelled of garlic, roasting rosemary, and expensive wine. It was early evening, and the dining room was already half full. Men in suits and women in cocktail dresses sat at tables with white linen cloths. A hostess with perfect hair and a clipboard stood at the podium. She looked Hannah up and down, her gaze lingering on the worn sneakers Hannah hadn't been able to replace. "Can I help you?" the hostess asked, her tone suggesting that Hannah was definitely in the wrong place. "I am here to see Mr. Vieri," Hannah said. Her voice shook slightly, but she lifted her chin. The hostess raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Vieri is very busy. Do you have an appointment?" "No, but—" Hannah fumbled in her pocket and pulled out the card. "He gave me this. He told me to come." The hostess looked at the card, then back at Hannah, clearly skeptical. "Wait here." She walked away, heels clicking on the hardwood floor. Hannah stood by the door, feeling small and out of place. The waiters gliding by cast curious glances at her. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly wishing she hadn't come. This was stupid. He was a mafia boss. He probably gave cards to everyone he saved, like a politician kissing babies. Then the door at the back of the dining room opened. Luca walked out. He wasn't wearing a jacket today. He wore a black dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing the strong, corded muscles of his forearms and the ink she had seen in the rain. His tie was loosened at the collar. He looked like he had been working, not sitting in an office. He looked annoyed as he strode toward the front, listening to the hostess whispering in his ear. But then he looked up. He saw her. The annoyance vanished instantly. He stopped moving. A spark lit in his dark eyes, surprise, followed immediately by something warmer, something that made Hannah's breath hitch. Luca said something to the hostess, a sharp dismissal that made the woman flinch and scurry away. Then he walked toward Hannah. He moved with a predator's grace, smooth and confident, and every head in the room seemed to turn slightly to watch him. "You came," he said when he reached her. His voice was just as deep as she remembered, a low rumble that vibrated in her chest. Yes," Hannah stammered. "I just wanted to say thank you. I didn't get a chance the other night." Luca didn't smile, but the lines around his eyes softened. He looked her over, a quick, assessing glance that checked for injuries without being lewd. "You are walking okay? No dizziness?" "I'm fine," she said. "Just bruises." "Good." He nodded, satisfied. "You are hungry?" "No, I didn't come for food. I just—" "You are hungry," Luca decided. He gestured to a man standing by the bar, a large man who looked more like a bouncer than a waiter. The man nodded and moved to clear a table in the far corner, away from the windows and the other guests. "Come," Luca said. He reached out and placed his hand on the small of her back. The contact was electric. Even through her sweater, she felt the heat of his palm. He guided her through the dining room, and Hannah noticed the way the room reacted. Conversation lulled as they passed. A waiter froze in place until Luca walked by. It was fear, yes, but it was also respect. He was the king of this castle, and he was escorting her. He pulled out her chair himself. "Sit." He sat across from her, leaning his elbows on the table. He waved a waiter over. "Carbonara," Luca ordered, "and a glass of the Nebbiolo. For me, water." He didn't ask her what she wanted. He just ordered, assuming control with an ease that was both arrogant and strangely comforting. "So, Hannah Reed," Luca said, clasping his hands in front of him. "You walked all the way up here from Riverside? How did you know I walked?" "Because the buses are down and you do not have a car," he said simply. "And you look flushed." "I wanted to return the money you left at the diner," she said, realizing she had forgotten the real reason for her visit in the nervousness of seeing him. "Keep it," he said, his tone brokering no argument. "Consider it hazard pay for serving coffee in a hurricane." The waiter arrived with the wine and a basket of warm bread. Hannah took a sip of the wine. It was rich and complex, tasting of dark cherries. It settled her nerves. "Why did you do it?" she asked suddenly. Luca paused, breaking a piece of bread. "Do what?" "Jump. You could have died. You're men. They told you not to." Luca looked down at the table, watching his own hands. He was quiet for a long moment. The sounds of the restaurant faded into the background. "I grew up in Riverside," he said quietly. "My father was a fisherman. I spent more time on the water than on land until I was 18. I know what the canal looks like when it is hungry." He looked up, meeting her gaze. His eyes were unguarded for the first time. "I saw you go in. Hannah. I saw the fear on your face. I couldn't drive past that. It wasn't a choice." He was carefully stepping around the truth of who he was now, focusing on the boy he had been. He didn't mention the syndicate, or the rivals, or the violence that defined his life. He just offered her a piece of his humanity. "I thought I was dead," Hannah admitted, her voice trembling. "When the water hit me, I thought, this is it. This is how it ends." Luca listened intently, his focus entirely on her. He didn't interrupt. He didn't look at his phone. He made her feel like she was the only person in the room. "You fought hard," he said. "You are stronger than you look." The waiter returned with 2 steaming plates of pasta. It was simple spaghetti, egg, cheese, pepper. But the smell was divine. Hannah realized she hadn't eaten a real meal since the storm. They ate in a comfortable silence for a few minutes. Hannah watched him. He ate with the same efficiency she had seen at the diner, but there was a grace to his movements. He seemed out of place in the rolled-up sleeves and the tattoos, yet he owned the space completely. Outside, the weather turned, the sky had darkened while they talked, and a fresh band of rain swept over the city. A sudden, violent crack of thunder shook the building, rattling the large window panes near the front of the restaurant. Hannah gasped, her body jerking involuntarily. The fork clattered onto her plate. Her heart slammed against her ribs, the sound throwing her instantly back to the moment the levee broke. Her hand flew to her chest, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Before she could even embarrass herself by apologizing, Luca was there. He reached across the table, his movement a blur of speed. His large hand engulfed hers where it rested on the white tablecloth. "Hannah," he said firmly. He didn't pull away. He held her hand tight, anchoring her to the present, to the warmth of the restaurant, to him. She looked up, her eyes wide and frightened. She met his gaze. He was staring at her with an intensity that burned. It wasn't just concern anymore. It was raw, potent attraction mixed with a fierce protective instinct. His thumb began to move, slowly, rhythmically stroking back and forth across her knuckles. The skin of his hand was rough, calloused from work and violence, but his touch was incredibly gentle. "It is just noise," he said softly. "You are here. You are with me. Nothing touches you here." Hannah stopped breathing. The panic began to recede, replaced by a different kind of pounding in her chest. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with a sudden, overwhelming electricity. She could feel the heat radiating from him, could see the dark flecks of gold in his eyes. She didn't pull her hand away. She didn't want to. For a long, silent minute, nobody moved. The restaurant, the waiters, the storm outside, it all faded away. There was only the pressure of his hand on hers, the slow, hypnotic movement of his thumb, and the way he was looking at her mouth. The attraction was undeniable. It hummed between them, dangerous and heavy. She knew, in that moment, that walking through that door had been a mistake, a beautiful, terrible mistake. She was safe from the water, but she was drowning in something else entirely. And looking at Luca Vieri, she realized he was drowning too. 3 days after the carbonara, Hannah found herself walking up the hill to Il Nido again. She told herself it was just to pay him back for the dinner, or maybe to ask if he knew anyone hiring for temporary cleanup crews. But deep down, she knew that was a lie. She was drawn to him. It was a gravitational pull she couldn't explain and was terrified to examine too closely. The restaurant was quieter tonight. It was a Tuesday, and the post-storm slump was keeping people at home. When she walked in, the hostess, who now greeted her with a polite, if confused, smile, nodded towards the bar. "Mr. Vieri is just finishing a meeting," she said. Hannah sat at the far end of the polished mahogany bar. From her vantage point, she could see the entire dining room. Luca was standing near the kitchen entrance, talking to his head chef and 2 waiters. He wasn't shouting, he wasn't even raising his voice, but the air around him was different. When he spoke, the staff didn't just listen. They snapped to attention, their spines straightened. They nodded quickly, their eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that bordered on reverence. It wasn't just the staff. A group of 4 men in expensive suits at a table near the window stopped talking every time Luca walked past. They watched him with guarded eyes, their laughter dying down until he was out of earshot. It was a look Hannah recognized from the nature documentaries her father used to watch, the way the herd goes silent when the lion walks through the grass. He's not just a restaurant owner, Hannah thought, a cold shiver running down her spine. He's something else, something bigger. She turned back to the bar, her fingers tracing the rim of her water glass, above the rows of glittering bottles. A large flat-screen television was playing the nightly news on mute. The chyron scrolling across the bottom was bright red. Flood relief efforts stalled by gang violence. Hannah frowned. She asked the bartender, a young man with kind eyes, to turn the volume up. Police are reporting an uptick in looting in the Riverside and Dockside districts. The anchor was saying, authorities believe this is an escalation in the ongoing turf war between rival criminal organizations. The Brighton Point Police Department has identified the Vieri family as a suspected organized crime syndicate heavily involved in the area. Hannah's heart stopped. The screen changed. A photo flashed up next to the anchor's head. It was a surveillance shot, grainy and black and white, but unmistakable. It was Luca. He was walking out of a courthouse, surrounded by lawyers, looking younger but just as hard-edged. The Vieri organization, led by Luca Vieri, has long been suspected of controlling the city's construction and waste management contracts, the reporter continued. While no major convictions have stuck, sources say the syndicate is mobilizing to protect its assets during the crisis. The glass slipped from Hannah's hand. It hit the bar top with a loud clatter, water spilling across the polished wood. "Are you okay, miss?" the bartender asked, rushing over with a towel. I have to go to the bathroom," Hannah stammered. She slid off the stool, her legs feeling like lead. She pushed past a waiter and practically ran down the hallway to the restrooms. Inside, she locked the door and gripped the porcelain sink so hard her knuckles turned white. She stared at herself in the mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with panic. Mafia. The word hung in the air, heavy and terrifying. It wasn't just a rumor anymore. It wasn't just Sal's nervous whispers. It was real. The man who had held her hand during the thunder, who had pulled her from the flood, was a criminal kingpin. He was one of the men responsible for the violence tearing her city apart. "You have to leave," a voice in her head screamed. "Get out! Run!" But beneath the fear, there was anger. A hot, searing anger that he had sat there, eating pasta with her, playing the role of the gentle savior while his people were out there breaking the city. She unlocked the door. She didn't go to the exit. She marched down the hallway, past the kitchen, to the heavy wooden door at the end that she knew led to the office. She didn't knock. She shoved the door open. Luca was sitting behind a massive desk covered in paperwork and blueprints. He looked up, startled, his hand instinctively moving toward a drawer before he recognized her. "Hannah," he said, standing up. "What is wrong? Did something happen?" "You are a liar," she said. Her voice was shaking, but it was loud. Luca paused. He looked at her, then passed her to the open hallway. He walked around the desk, closed the door firmly, and locked it. "Sit down, Hannah," he said quietly. "Don't tell me what to do," she shouted. "I saw the news. Luca, the syndicate, the organized crime. That is you. That is who you are." Luca didn't flinch. He leaned against the front of his desk, crossing his arms over his chest. He didn't look angry, and he looked resigned. "I never lied to you. Hannah, you didn't tell me the truth. You let me think you were just a guy who owned a restaurant. You let me sit here and drink your wine while your people are out there." "Doing what? Selling drugs? Hurting people?" "I don't sell drugs," Luca said. His voice was cold now, sharp as a knife. "I have never allowed a single gram of product near a school or a playground in this city. If I catch anyone doing it, they answer to me." "Oh, that makes it okay?" she shot back, stepping closer to him. "You are a benevolent criminal? Is that it?" "I am a necessary evil," he said. "Do you know what happens if I disappear tomorrow? Hannah, the Novak crew takes over. Do you know them? They are animals. They traffic women. They burn down businesses that don't pay. I keep them out. I keep the order. You are profiting off this." She gestured wildly to the window, to the city below. "People are drowning. They are losing their homes, and you are protecting your assets. You are making money off their misery." Luca's expression shattered. The cool mask of the boss fell away, replaced by a flash of genuine, hurt anger. He pushed off the desk and took a step toward her. "You think I'm making money off this?" he demanded, his voice rising for the first time. "I have spent $200,000 in the last 4 days. Who do you think paid for the generators at the hospital? Who do you think sent the trucks of water to the stadium?" Hannah blinked, taken aback. "The city council?" "The city council is still debating the budget," Luca snapped. "The mayor is at his vacation home in Florida. I sent the trucks, me, anonymously, because I live here, because these are my people." He stopped, breathing hard, his chest heaving. His eyes were burning with a mixture of shame and fierce conviction. "I am not a saint, Hannah. I have done things that would make you sick, but I do not profit from suffering. And the night I pulled you out of that water, that had nothing to do with business. That was just me, just a man who couldn't watch you die." The silence that followed was heavy. The only sound was the hum of the large commercial refrigerator through the wall and the drumming of rain against the office window. Hannah looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the exhaustion in his face, the lines of strain around his mouth. She saw the way his hands were clenched into fists at his sides, as if he was fighting the urge to reach out. Her anger began to drain away, leaving behind a confused, aching emptiness. She wanted to hate him. It would be so much easier to hate him. But all she could feel was the memory of his arms around her in the cold water, the way he had shielded her body with his own. "I don't understand you," she whispered. "I know," Luca said. His voice dropped, losing its edge. He took a hesitant step closer. The room seemed to shrink, the air growing thin. "I didn't plan for you, Hannah," he admitted. "I keep my life separate, clean, but since the storm, since I saw you go under—" He stopped. He was close enough now that she could smell the sandalwood and rain on his skin. "What?" she breathed. "It scared me," he said softly. "Seeing you in the water. I have seen men die. I have seen terrible things, but watching you fight the current, it terrified me in a way I do not understand. I can't get it out of my head." He raised a hand slowly. It trembled slightly, a crack in his armor that she felt in her own heart. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers brushed the sensitive skin of her neck. Hannah gasped. A shiver ran through her, electric and immediate. It started where he touched her and radiated down her spine, settling low in her stomach. She didn't pull away. She couldn't. Luca watched her reaction. His eyes darkened, the pupils blowing wide. He moved his hand from her hair to her cheek, cupping her face. His thumb brushed over her cheekbone, his touch reverent, as if she were something fragile and precious. "Hannah?" he asked. It was a question, a request for permission. Hannah's heart was racing so fast she thought he must be able to feel it through her skin. Her breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. The logical part of her brain was screaming that this was dangerous, that he was dangerous. But the rest of her was pulling toward him like a tide. She edged closer. Her shoes scuffed on the carpet. Luca lowered his head slowly. When their foreheads touched, she closed her eyes, shutting out the office, the news report, the world. He leaned in. His lips met hers. It was soft at first, tentative, a testing of the waters. His lips were warm and firm, moving against hers with a gentleness that belied the violence of his life. Hannah let out a small, broken sound in her throat. She leaned into him, her hands coming up to grip the front of his shirt. That small movement broke the dam. Luca groaned low in his throat. The kiss deepened, losing its hesitation. It became hungry, desperate. He tasted of wine and coffee and raw need. His other hand came up to cradle the back of her head, his fingers threading through her hair, holding her steady as he devoured her. Hannah responded instantly. She opened to him, her body pressing against his. She felt the solid wall of his chest, the heat radiating from him, the sheer, overwhelming strength of the man. He shifted, a hand sliding down her spine to the small of her back, his fingers splayed out, pressing her closer, urging her hips against his. Hannah's knees went weak. She clung to his shirt, bunching the expensive fabric in her fists, anchoring herself to him. The kiss was a storm of its own, drowning out everything else. For a moment, she forgot he was a criminal. She forgot she was a waitress. There was only the heat of his mouth, the rough slide of his hands, and the desperate, aching need to be closer. They broke apart for air, gasping, their foreheads resting against each other. Hannah's lips were swollen, Her face flushed. Luca's eyes were wild, black pools of desire that seemed to swallow her whole. "Hannah," he rasped, his voice wrecked, before she could answer, before she could decide if she wanted to run or stay. A sharp knock echoed through the room. "Boss, it's urgent." The sound was like a gunshot. They jolted apart. Hannah stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth. Luca spun toward the door, his body instantly shifting from lover to fighter, his posture rigid, his hands curling into fists. The moment was shattered. The reality of his world came crashing back in. "Enter," Luca barked. The door flew open. A man Hannah hadn't seen before, short, stocky, with a scar running through his eyebrow, burst in. When he looked frantic, "Boss, the Novak crew hit the distribution center in Riverside. They are looting the supplies. And Marco—" Luca's face went stone cold. "What about Marco? They jumped him," the lieutenant said, glancing nervously at Hannah. "He's in the hospital. Bad shape. They left a message. They said Riverside belongs to them now." The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Hannah watched as Luca changed. The vulnerability she had seen moments ago vanished. The passion in his eyes was replaced by a cold, lethal fury. "Get the car," Luca said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. "Call the boys, all of them." He turned to Hannah. "You need to go home," he said. Hannah stared at him, still reeling from the kiss, from the intrusion, from the violence in the lieutenant's words. "Luca, I mean it," he said. "It is not safe here. Not tonight." He walked over to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a heavy black phone. He punched in a number. "Leo," he said into the phone. "Take a team to 4th Street, the apartment building on the corner. Yes, the yellow one. Sit on it. Nobody goes in or out unless they live there. If you see a Novak car within 2 blocks, burn it." He hung up. He looked at Hannah. "I am walking you home. I can walk myself," she whispered, fear creeping back in. "No, you can't," he said. "Not anymore." The walk back to Riverside was silent. The rain had started again, a miserable, steady drizzle. Luca held a large black umbrella over both of them. He walked on the street side, placing his body between her and the road. His car followed slowly a half-block behind, its headlights cutting through the fog. Every now and then, his arm brushed against hers. Every time it happened, Hannah felt a jolt of electricity, a reminder of what had happened in the office. But he didn't take her hand. He was in work mode now. His eyes were constantly moving, scanning the rooftops, the parked cars, the shadows in the alleyways. When they reached her building, he walked her all the way to the vestibule. "You have security here?" he asked, looking at the flimsy lock on the inner door. "It is just a buzz-in system," she said. Luca frowned. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notepad. He scribbled something on it. "Leo is outside," he said, tearing off the page. "He's in the gray van across the street. If you hear anything, if you see anything, you do not call the cops. You call me. If I don't answer, you call Leo. This is his number." He handed her the paper. Hannah took it. Her hand brushed his. "Luca," she said softly, "what are you going to do?" "I am going to handle it," he said. "That means violence, doesn't it?" Luca looked at her. He didn't lie. "They hurt my people. Hannah, they are stealing food from families who have lost everything. I cannot let that stand." He looked so tired. Behind the anger, she saw the weight of it all pressing down on him. "Be careful," she whispered. Something in his face softened. He stepped closer, crowding her against the glass door. For a second, she thought he was going to kiss her again. She wanted him to. God help her, she wanted him to. He raised a hand, hovering it near her cheek, but he didn't touch her. He pulled it back, curling his fingers into a fist. "Lock the door behind you." "Hannah," he said, his voice rough. He turned and walked away into the rain. Hannah watched him go. She watched him get into the waiting black car. She watched it drive away, disappearing into the dark. Wet streets of the city. She turned and unlocked her door. Climbing the stairs to her empty apartment, she locked the deadbolt. She leaned her back against the door and slid down to the floor. She touched her lips. They still tingled. She was safe. He had promised to keep her safe. But as she listened to the rain drumming against the roof, Hannah knew that safety was an illusion. She had stepped into Luca Vieri's world, and she wasn't sure she could ever step back out. And the terrifying part was, she wasn't sure she wanted to. The cleanup at the Riverside Community Center had taken on a rhythm that was equal parts exhaustion and hope. For the last 5 days, Hannah Reed had thrown herself into the work with a fervor that bordered on obsession. She hauled bags of damp drywall out to the street, organized mountains of donated clothes, and poured endless cups of coffee for families whose homes were still drying out. It was hard work, the kind that made her muscles ache and her hands rough, but she welcomed it. The physical labor was a distraction. It kept her mind off the water level in the canal, which had finally returned to normal, and it tried and failed to keep her mind off Luca Vieri. It wasn't working. Every time she paused to wipe sweat from her forehead, she saw his eyes, not the cold, guarded eyes of the mafia boss on the news, but the raw, terrified gaze of the man who had pulled her from the flood. She remembered the warmth of his office, the hum of the refrigerator, and the shock of his mouth on hers. Hannah? She jumped, dropping a stack of folded blankets. Mrs. Gable, the center's director, was watching her with a knowing smile. "You are miles away, dear Mrs." Gable said. "That is the 3rd time I have called your name." "Sorry," Hannah stammered, feeling a hot flush rise up her neck. "Just tired, Mrs." Gable's smile faded slightly as she looked toward the front entrance. "We have visitors, not the kind looking for soup." Hannah turned. 2 men in cheap suits were standing in the doorway. They didn't look like volunteers. They had the weary, cynical posture of men who had seen too much of the city's underbelly. "Hannah Reed?" the taller one asked, walking over. He flashed a badge. "Detective Miller, this is Detective Hayes. We need a word." Hannah wiped her hands on her jeans, her heart doing a nervous stutter step. She recognized Miller. He was the cop from the underpass, the one who had looked at Luca with pure hatred. "I am busy," Hannah said, keeping her voice steady. "This won't take long," Miller said. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so the families nearby wouldn't hear. "We know you have been spending time with Luca Vieri. We know you were at Il Nido 2 nights ago. I went to pay a bill." Hannah lied. It felt thin even to her own ears. Miller sighed, a sound like a tire leaking air. "Listen to me. Miss Reed, you seem like a nice girl. You volunteer. You work hard. You have a clean record. Do not get mixed up with a man like Vieri. He saved my life," Hannah said defensively. "He's a predator." Hayes chimed in. "He's using you. Men like Luca. They collect people, especially pretty ones. And when they are done, or when things get messy, those people get hurt." Miller leaned in, his eyes hard. "We are building a RICO case. Hannah, it is going to stick this time. When Vieri goes down, he's going to take everyone close to him down with him. Don't be in the blast radius." They left her with a card and a lingering sense of dread. Hannah stood in the middle of the gym, shivering despite the humidity. They were right. Logically, she knew they were right. He was a criminal. He was dangerous. But then she looked at the corner of the gym. Stacked against the wall were 50 crates of bottled water, fresh blankets, and boxes of expensive baby formula. They had arrived that morning in a nondescript white van. No return address, no invoice. Just a driver who nodded at Hannah and said, "Boss says stay dry. Later." She had seen Mrs. Gable crying over a thick envelope of cash found slid under the office door, enough to keep the center open for another 6 months. The police saw a monster. Hannah saw a man who was quietly holding the neighborhood together with blood money and a guilty conscience. The conflict warred inside her, a knot of gratitude and guilt that tightened every time she thought of him. The tension broke 3 days later. It was late afternoon. The sky was a bruising purple, threatening rain again. Hannah was near the front entrance of the center, helping a young mother load a stroller. When shouting erupted on the sidewalk, she froze. Outside, near the donation bins, 3 men in leather jackets were circling a group of local teenagers. Hannah recognized the jackets. They wore the colors of the Novak crew, blue and black. "Get lost, kid," one of the men sneered, shoving a 16-year-old boy backward. "This block belongs to us now. You pay the toll or you bleed. Hey! Hannah shouted, stepping out onto the steps. Leave them alone! The Novak thug turned, grinning. It was a nasty expression, full of bad intentions. Well, look at this. The waitress. Vieri's little pet. Hannah's stomach dropped. They knew who she was. Before the man could take a step toward her, tires screeched. 2 black SUVs roared around the corner, jumping the curb and boxing the Novak men in against the brick wall of the center. Doors flew open. 4 of Luca's men piled out. They were not smiling. They moved with the synchronized aggression of soldiers. At the lead was Leo, the bodyguard Luca had left outside her apartment. You are lost, Leo growled, stepping into the Novak thug's face. This is neutral ground. Not anymore, the thug spat back. One of the Novak men reached for his waistband. Leo didn't hesitate. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisted it with a sickening crack, and shoved him into the side of the SUV. Panic flared. The teenagers scrambled back. Hannah stood frozen in the doorway, heart hammering against her ribs. It was about to turn into a brawl. Right there on the steps of the community center. Enough. The single word cracked through the air like a whip. The rear door of the second SUV opened. Luca Vieri stepped out. He wore a charcoal suit, immaculate despite the weather. He didn't shout, he didn't run. He simply walked into the center of the chaos, and the violence evaporated. His men stepped back. The Novak thugs froze, their bravado shrinking under his gaze. Luca looked at the man Leo had pinned. He adjusted his cufflinks, his expression bored, almost disappointed. You are frightening the children, Luca said calmly. Go back to Novak. Tell him if I see his people on this block again, I will not send them back walking. I will send them back in boxes. Do you understand? The thug nodded, pale and sweating. Get out. The Novak men scrambled into their car and peeled away, tires smoking. Luca watched them go, then turned slowly to the center. His eyes found Hannah immediately. The mask of the dawn slipped, just for a fraction of a second, revealing a flash of intense relief. He walked up the steps. Get your things, he said. I have 2 more hours on my shift, Hannah protested, though her voice lacked conviction. Not today, Luca said. I'm taking you home. The drive was silent. The rain had started again. Heavy sheets of water that turned the world outside the car into a gray blur. Hannah sat in the passenger seat of Luca's sedan. He was driving, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. The air in the car was thick, charged with the adrenaline of the confrontation and something else, something heavier. You can't keep doing this, Hannah said softly, breaking the silence. Doing what? Luca asked. Eyes on the road. Saving me. Showing up like some dark night. Would you prefer I let them hurt you? No. Hannah turned in her seat to look at him, but the police were at the center. Luca. They warned me. They said I am going to get caught in the crossfire. They said I am just a toy to you. Luca flinched. It was a small movement, a tightening of his jaw, but she saw it. Is that what you think? He asked. That you are a toy? I don't know what to think, Hannah cried, frustration bubbling over. I am a waitress. Luca, I worry about electric bills and student loans. I don't understand this world. I don't want to be one more broken thing in your life. I can't handle it. Luca slammed on the brakes. He pulled the car to the curb, tires crunching on gravel. The engine idled. A low purr beneath the drumming of the rain. He didn't look at her. He stared out the windshield, his chest rising and falling rapidly. You think I wanted this? He asked. His voice was low, laced with a bitterness that surprised her. You think I looked at you and thought, yes, let me drag her into this hell? Then why are you here? Hannah whispered. Why don't you leave me alone? Because I can't. He turned to her then. His eyes were raw, stripped of all their usual defenses. He looked shattered. I have spent 10 years building walls. Hannah, 10 years becoming the man who can run this city, the man who doesn't feel things because feeling things gets you killed. And then I pulled you out of the water. He let out a shaky breath, running a hand through his hair. You are the first person in years who has made me look at my life and wish that I had chosen a different path. When I am around you, I don't feel like the boss. I just feel like a man who wants to be better. Hannah's heart ached. The vulnerability in his voice tore through her defenses. She saw the loneliness in him, vast and deep as the ocean. She shifted in her seat, unbuckling her seatbelt. She moved closer to the center console. Their knees brushed together. Luca watched her, his gaze dropping to her mouth, then back up to her eyes. He looked like a man starving, terrified to reach for the bread in front of him. She reached out. She lifted her hand and placed it gently on his cheek. His skin was warm, the faint stubble rough against her palm. He leaned into her touch instantly. He closed his eyes, exhaling a shuddering breath, as if her hand was the only anchor keeping him from drifting away. "Luca," she whispered. He opened his eyes. They were dark, dilated, burning with a hunger that made her toes curl. He reached for her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers. He squeezed tight, possessive and desperate. "Hannah," he warned, his voice rough, "if you touch me, I am not going to be able to stop." She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned forward. "Don't stop." Luca moved. There was no hesitation this time, no tentative testing of the waters. He released the steering wheel and turned his body, reaching for her. His hand tangled in the hair at the nape of her neck, and he pulled her toward him. His mouth crashed onto hers. It was a kiss of desperation. It was hungry and deep, tasting of rain and suppressed longing. Hannah gasped, opening to him, and he took the invitation, his tongue sweeping into her mouth, claiming her. She made a small noise in her throat, her fingers curling into the collar of his jacket, pulling him closer. The center console dug into her hip, but she didn't care. She needed to be closer. Luca groaned, a low, animal sound. He hooked his arm around her waist and hauled her bodily over the console. She scrambled, half climbing into his lap, careless of the gear shift, his arms wrapped around her, crushing her against his chest. He felt solid, immutable, like a rock in the middle of a storm. Hannah buried her hands in his hair, gripping tight, kissing him back with a ferocity that matched his own. The rain hammered against the roof, enclosing them in a small, dark world. There was no mafia, no flood, no police. Just the heat of his body, the rough slide of his hands on her back, the overwhelming scent of him filling her senses. He broke the kiss, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He inhaled deeply, his breath hot on her skin. His hand splayed wide over her back, pressing her down against him, feeling the rapid rise and fall of her chest. "Hannah," he murmured against her skin. "Hannah." She pulled back slightly, framing his face with her hands. Her lips were swollen, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I am scared. Luca," she whispered, "not of you, never of you, but of this, of what it means to be with you." Luca looked at her. He brought his hands up to cover hers, holding them against his face. His expression was fierce, a vow etched in stone. "I know," he rasped. "I know, but listen to me." He leaned his forehead against hers. "I will never let anything happen to you. Do you hear me? I would burn this whole city to the ground before I let anyone touch a hair on your head. I would dismantle my empire brick by brick if it meant keeping you safe." The intensity of his promise shook her. It was terrifying and beautiful. "I believe you," she said. He kissed her again, softer this time, a seal on the promise. "I have to get you home," he said reluctantly, though he didn't let go, "before things get worse." Things got worse 3 hours later. Hannah was in her apartment, pacing the living room. She couldn't settle. Her body was still humming from the encounter in the car. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt Luca's hands on her. Her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but she knew instantly who it was. "Luca?" she answered. "Hannah." His voice was different. It wasn't the warm, rough voice from the car. It was tight, strained, vibrating with controlled panic. "Are you home?" he demanded. "Is the door locked?" "Yes, I am home. What is wrong?" In the background, she heard shouting, glass crunching, sirens wailing in the distance. "They hit the restaurant," Luca said. "A drive-by. 5 minutes ago." Hannah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God!" "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," he said quickly. "Nobody was hit, just glass. Just a message." Hannah's knees gave out. She sank onto the sofa. "The restaurant, Il Nido, the place where they had eaten pasta, where he had held her hand, if he had been standing near the window, if he had been leaving. The terror that washed over her wasn't for herself. It wasn't about the police warning or the danger of being associated with him. It was a cold, paralyzing fear that he could be hurt, that the warm, solid body she had held in the car could be broken. "Luca," she breathed, "you could have been killed. I am not that easy to kill," he said, but his voice cracked. "Hannah, listen to me. Leo is coming up to your door right now. Do not open it for anyone else. I am sending a car. A car. Why? Because my house is a fortress. And your apartment has a glass door." He snapped. "I am not taking chances. Not tonight." 40 minutes later, Hannah was walking down a hallway in the back of Il Nido. The restaurant was a disaster zone. Police tape crisscrossed the entrance. The beautiful front window was a jagged maw of broken glass. Inside, staff were sweeping up debris, their faces pale. Luca's men had brought her in through the back delivery entrance. They were heavily armed now, open carry. The air smelled of ozone and aggression. She reached the office door. It was slightly ajar. Inside, the room was crowded. 6 men stood around Luca's desk. Hannah recognized the lieutenant from before. The mood was grim, heavy with the promise of violence. Luca stood behind the desk. He had shed his jacket. His tie was gone. He looked lethal. "Novak has crossed the line," Luca was saying. His voice was low, but it carried a weight that made the men shift uncomfortably. "He hit my home. He endangered my staff. He thinks we are weak because we are helping with the flood relief." He placed both hands on the desk, leaning forward. "We are done playing defense. Tonight, we go on the offense. I want every Novak safe house in the city turned over. I want their accounts frozen. I want them to bleed." He paused, looking at each of his men in turn. "And understand this. There is a new standing order." Hannah held her breath. Standing in the shadows of the hallway. "Hannah Reed is off limits," Luca said. "She is under the family's protection. Level 1. If Novak even looks at her, if anyone goes near her, you do not wait for my order. You end them." The men nodded in unison. "Understood, boss." Hannah leaned against the wall, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She heard her name spoken in that room, woven into the declaration of war. She realized then that there was no going back. The detectives had been right about the danger, but they had been wrong about one thing. She wasn't a toy. She was the weakness of the most dangerous man in the city. And as she listened to him plan the destruction of his enemies to keep her safe, she realized that she was now the center of the storm. The phone call came at 2 a.m. Hannah Reed was awake, sitting on her living room floor surrounded by boxes of donated canned goods she had brought home to organize. The rain was still falling outside, a soft, relentless drumming against the window pane that usually soothed her but tonight felt like a countdown. She answered on the first ring, knowing instinctively who it was. "Luca?" she whispered. "Hannah." His voice was unrecognizable. Gone was the warm, rough timbre that had promised to burn the city down for her. In its place was a flat, metallic coldness, devoid of any emotion. "Listen to me closely," he said. "I am pulling the detail from your building. Leo is leaving." "What?" Hannah scrambled to her knees, gripping the phone. "Why? Is it over? Did you stop them?" "It is over," Luca said, "but not the way you think. I am done. Hannah. I cannot have you around anymore. You are a distraction. I have a war to fight, and I cannot fight it if I am worried about a waitress who doesn't know how to stay out of the line of fire." Hannah felt like she had been slapped. The cruelty of his words stung more than the physical threat of the Novak crew ever could. "Luca." "Stop," she said, her voice shaking. "I know what you are doing. You are trying to push me away because you are scared." "I am not scared," he snapped. "I am practical. You are a moment of weakness. I am correcting it. Do not come to the restaurant. Do not call this number again. Go back to your life, Hannah. Forget you ever met me." The line went dead. Hannah stared at the phone, the silence of the apartment rushing back in to suffocate her. She knew he was lying. She had felt his heart racing against her chest in the car. She had seen the raw terror in his eyes when he thought she was hurt. He was cutting her loose to save her, severing the tie so his enemies wouldn't use her against him. But knowing that didn't stop the pain. It tore through her chest, a physical ache that doubled her over. She dropped the phone and buried her face in her hands, sobbing into the quiet room. In the midst of the tears, a terrifying realization settled over her. It wasn't just fear or gratitude she was feeling. It wasn't just attraction. She'd fallen in love with him. She'd fallen in love with the monster who was trying to save her by breaking her heart. For the next 3 days, Hannah operated on autopilot. She refused to stay in her apartment and mope. If Luca was going to fight his war, she was going to fight hers. Her battlefield was the Riverside Community Center, and her weapons were dry socks, hot soup, and a stubborn refusal to let the city drown. She threw herself into the work with a manic energy that worried Mrs. Gable. She organized a massive supply drive, calling in favors from every local business that hadn't been flooded. She spent 12 hours a day on her feet, moving boxes, comforting crying mothers, and sweeping mud out of the intake hall. But she wasn't careless. She noticed the cars. They were subtle, but not subtle enough. A gray sedan parked 2 blocks down, idling for hours, a van with tinted windows that circled the block every 40 minutes. Men she didn't recognize, hard-faced men who didn't look like flood victims, standing on street corners, smoking cigarettes and watching the center entrance. Novak's people. They were marking her. They were waiting for an opening. Hannah kept her head down. She stayed inside the center during daylight hours. She took ride shares directly from the door to her apartment. She wore the silver charm bracelet Luca had sent her the morning after the drive-by shooting, a delicate chain with a heavy, unadorned silver disc. The note had been brief. Wear this, always. She hadn't taken it off since. It felt like a shackle and a shield all at once. On Thursday evening, the rain picked up again. The center was quieting down, volunteers heading home to their own families. Hannah was in the back storage room, counting inventory, when Sarah, one of the newer volunteers, poked her head in. Sarah looked pale, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "Hannah?" Sarah said, her voice high and brittle. "There is a call on the main line. It sounds urgent." Hannah frowned, wiping dust from her hands. "Who is it?" They didn't say. But they said there is a family trapped in a warehouse down by the docks. They said the water is rising and they can't get out. They asked for you specifically. They said you helped them during the first storm. The blood drained from Hannah's face. Trapped. Rising water. The words triggered a visceral reaction. Instantly, she was back in the canal, the cold water filling her nose, the darkness closing in. Her hands started to tremble. "Did they call 911?" Hannah asked, forcing her voice to remain steady. "They said the lines are jammed," Sarah said, wringing her hands. "They said the water is coming in fast. Hannah, they sounded terrified. There are kids." "Kids?" Hannah looked at the clock. 7 p.m. It was dark outside. "Tell them to hang on," Hannah said, grabbing her coat. "I am going." She didn't think about the gray sedan. She didn't think about Luca's warning. All she could see was a mental image of a family huddled in the dark, water lapping at their feet, waiting for a rescue that might not come. She couldn't leave them. It went against every fiber of her being. She ordered a rideshare on her phone, her fingers shaking so badly she mistyped the address twice. "Be careful," Sarah whispered as Hannah rushed out the door. Hannah didn't look back. If she had, she might have seen the tears in Sarah's eyes, or the way the girl pulled a burner phone from her pocket and sent a single text message the moment Hannah was gone. The rideshare driver dropped her off at the entrance to the dockyards. "I cannot go in there." "Miss," the driver said, eyeing the rusted gates and the shadows stretching between the shipping containers. "It is private property, and it looks flooded." "It is fine," Hannah said, stepping out into the drizzle. "I will walk from here." The car sped away, taillights vanishing into the mist. Hannah stood alone in the silence of the docks. The smell hit her first, a thick, cloying scent of rot, diesel, and old river water. It was the smell of the storm. She checked her phone. The address Sarah had written down was for Warehouse 4B. It was a massive, hulking structure at the end of the pier, its corrugated metal sides groaning in the wind. "Hello?" Hannah called out, her voice small in the vast, empty space. She walked toward the warehouse. The ground was slick with mud. Puddles of standing water reflected the amber glow of the distant streetlights. "Is anyone there?" Silence. She reached the side door of the warehouse. It was unlocked. Swinging slightly in the wind, she pushed it open and stepped inside. It was pitch black. The air was damp and cold, heavy with the sound of dripping water. "Hello?" Hannah shouted. "I am from the community center. Can you hear me?" She took a few steps forward, turning on her phone's flashlight. The beam cut through the dusty air, illuminating towering stacks of crates and empty pallets. There was no family. There were no crying children. There was only the sound of a metal door sliding shut behind her. The loud, grinding clang echoed through the warehouse like a thunderclap. Hannah spun around. 3 men stepped out of the shadows. They wore dark clothes and balaclavas. They moved with a predatory silence that made Hannah's blood run cold. "You," one of them said. His voice was muffled by the mask, but she heard the sneer in it. "You are the waitress." Hannah backed away, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. No, you have the wrong person. I am here for a family." "There is no family, sweetheart," the man said, stepping closer. "Just us." Hannah turned to run. She sprinted toward the far end of the warehouse, aiming for a gap between the crates. She didn't make it 10 feet. A 4th man lunged from behind a stack of pallets. He tackled her, his heavy arm slamming across her chest. Hannah screamed, a raw, terrified sound that was cut short as she hit the concrete floor hard. The impact knocked the wind out of her. Her phone skittered away, the flashlight spinning wildly before coming to rest face down. "Get off me," she gasped, thrashing and kicking. Strong hands grabbed her arms, wrenching them behind her back. She felt the bite of plastic zip ties digging into her wrists. "Stop fighting!" A voice growled in her ear, "Or we put you to sleep right now." Hannah struggled, panic overriding reason. She tried to bite the hand clamping down on her shoulder. The man cursed and backhanded her. The blow was sharp and stinging, tasting of copper in her mouth. "Bag her," someone ordered. A rough fabric hood was shoved over her head. The world went dark. The smell of mildew and sweat filled her nose, suffocating her. Hannah was hauled to her feet. She was dragged, stumbling and blind, deeper into the warehouse. She could hear the sound of water getting louder, a sloshing, churning noise that made her knees weak. "Please," she begged, her voice muffled by the hood. "Please, you don't have to do this." "Shut up," the voice said. "Novak wants to hear you scream later. Save your breath." Luca Vieri was in the middle of a war council when his world ended. He was standing in the safe room of his penthouse, a map of the city spread out on the table. Leo and 3 other lieutenants were listening as Luca outlined the next phase of their strike against the Novak supply lines. His phone buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again and again, a specific pattern. Luca froze. That was the emergency line, the one only 3 people had. He picked it up. "Speak. It is Tony," the voice on the other end said. He sounded breathless. "I am at the community center, watching the girl, like you said, even though you pulled the detail." Luca's hand tightened on the phone. "What about her?" "She left. Boss. About 40 minutes ago. She looked panicked. Got in a rideshare. I followed her. Where is she? Tony." Luca's voice was dangerously quiet. "The docks," Tony said, "Pier 4. She went into the old textile warehouse." "Boss." "I saw Novak's van parked around the back." The phone shattered in Luca's hand. He didn't mean to do it. His grip just convulsed, cracking the screen and crushing the casing. He threw the broken device against the wall. "Leo!" Luca roared. The room went dead silent. His men had seen Luca angry. They had seen him violent. They had never seen him like this. His face was drained of color, his eyes wide and black, consumed by a terrifying, cold fire. "They have her," Luca said. The words came out like shards of glass. "Novak has Hannah." A collective intake of breath went through the room. They knew what this meant. This wasn't business anymore. This was an apocalypse. Get the cars, Luca ordered. He walked to the gun safe on the wall and punched in the code. He pulled out a heavy assault rifle and a combat knife. Call everyone. Every soldier, every earner, every associate. He turned to his men. He looked like death walking. There is no truce tonight, Luca said. No mercy. We kill them all. If she has a scratch on her, I will peel the skin from Novak's bones myself. Boss, Leo said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. The docks are a maze. We don't know which building. I know. Luca cut him off. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small tablet. He turned it on. A single red dot was pulsing on the map. She is wearing the bracelet, Luca whispered, a flicker of agony crossing his face. I tracked her heart. Now I am going to track her fear. The hood was ripped off. Hannah gasped, sucking in cold, damp air. She blinked, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. She was in the basement of the warehouse. It was a cavernous, concrete space filled with rusted machinery and rotting wooden pillars. But the most terrifying thing was the floor. It was underwater. Floodwater was seeping in through cracks in the foundation, bubbling up like black oil. It was already covering her shoes. Icy and foul, she was tied to a vertical metal beam. Her hands were bound behind the pillar, the zip ties biting into her skin. She pulled against them, but they held fast. Comfortable? Hannah looked up. Standing on a raised concrete platform a few feet away was a man. He was tall, with slicked back hair and a cruel, jagged scar running down his cheek. She recognized him. He was the lieutenant who had led the attack on the community center. Let me go, Hannah said. Her voice shook, but she held her head high. You have a problem with Luca. Not me. Luca is the problem, the lieutenant said, lighting a cigarette. The flame illuminated his grinning face. He thinks he is a king. He thinks he can run this city and play the hero at the same time. He stepped down from the platform, his boots splashing in the shallow water. He walked up to Hannah, blowing smoke in her face. You are pretty, he said. I can see why he likes you. But you are just a toy, sweetheart, a shiny little thing he picked up to make himself feel human. Do you really think he cares about you? Yes, Hannah said. The lieutenant laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. He is a destroyer, girl. Everything he touches turns to ash. He will get you killed. In fact, I think he already has. He gestured to the floor. The tide is coming in, he said. This basement floods every high tide. In an hour, that water will be at your neck. In 2 hours. Well, Hannah looked down. The water was already at her ankles. It was rising visibly, creeping up the denim of her jeans, panic, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat. The memory of the canal crashed over her, the weight of the water, the inability to breathe, the darkness. Her chest tightened. She started to hyperventilate, short, shallow gasps that made her head spin. He saves people, Hannah choked out, fighting the tears. He pulled me out. He is not a monster, he is a dead man, the lieutenant said, and you are the bait that is going to bring him here. He turned and walked back up the stairs. Enjoy the swim. Honey? The heavy metal door at the top of the stairs slammed shut. The lights clicked off. Hannah was alone in the dark. No, she whimpered. No, please, no. The silence was heavy, broken only by the relentless drip, drip, drip of the leaking ceiling and the soft lap of the water against the metal beam. The water was rising. She could feel it. It was icy cold, numbing her feet, inching up her shins. Hannah closed her eyes tight. The darkness of the warehouse merged with the darkness of the memory. She felt like she was back in the storm. Back in the moment the levee broke. You are going to die here, a voice in her head whispered, just like your father, drowning in the dark. She sobbed, her body sagging against the ropes. The terror was a physical weight, crushing her lungs. Then she heard a voice. Hold on to me. It wasn't real. It was a memory, sharp and clear. Luca's voice, raw and shouting over the wind. Hold on to me, Hannah! She focused on that sound. She focused on the memory of his arms, solid as iron, wrapping around her waist. She focused on the heat of his chest against her back in the car, the steady, strong rhythm of his heartbeat. He is coming, she whispered to the darkness. He promised. The water reached her calves. It was biting cold. Hannah took a deep breath, forcing her lungs to expand. She visualized Luca. Not the mafia boss, but the man. The man who ordered carbonara for her. The man who held an umbrella over her in the rain. "Hold on," she whispered, turning the words into a mantra. "Hold on to him." She clenched her hands into fists behind the beam, feeling the cold metal of the silver bracelet pressing against her wrist. It was there. A piece of him was here with her. She lifted her chin in the darkness. She wouldn't scream. She wouldn't give Novak the satisfaction. If she was going to die, she would die believing in the man who had given her a second chance at life. Above ground, the world was exploding. Luca's convoy tore through the gates of the dockyard like a hurricane. 3 SUVs, engines roaring, smashed through the chain-link fence. They screeched to a halt in front of Warehouse 4B. Luca was out of the lead car before it stopped moving. He didn't wait for his men. He sprinted toward the metal door, his assault rifle raised. 2 of Novak's guards were standing by the entrance. They barely had time to raise their weapons. Luca didn't slow down. He fired. 2 controlled bursts. The guards dropped. He kicked the door open, the metal groaning under the impact. "Move!" he roared to his men. "Clear the ground floor. I am going down." He knew where she was. The red dot on his tablet was stationary, deep below the main structure. Gunfire erupted around him as Novak's men inside the warehouse opened up. Bullets sparked off the machinery. Luca didn't flinch. He moved through the chaos like a wraith, firing with lethal precision. His face a mask of stone. He reached the stairwell door. It was locked. Luca stepped back and fired into the lock mechanism until it shattered. He kicked the door open. A wave of damp, rotting air hit him. "Hannah!" he shouted into the black abyss of the stairwell. There was no answer, just the sound of water. Luca ran down the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. He pulled a heavy flashlight from his belt and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness. He saw the water first, black, oily, churning. Then he saw her. Hannah was slumped against a pillar in the center of the flooded basement. The water was up to her knees now. Her head was bowed, her hair hanging in wet curtains around her face. "Hannah!" Her head snapped up. She blinked in the sudden light. "Luca?" she croaked. Her voice was weak, trembling. "I am here," Luca shouted, splashing into the water. He waded toward her, ignoring the filth, ignoring the cold. "I am here. Hannah." He reached her. He dropped his rifle into the water. He didn't care, and pulled a knife from his belt. He grabbed her face with his free hand, tilting her head back. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his eyes scanning her frantically. "Did they touch you?" "No," she sobbed, collapsing against him as he cut the zip ties. "I knew you would come. I knew it." Luca freed her hands. She fell forward into his arms, burying her face in his neck. He wrapped his arms around her, squeezing her so tight he thought he might crush her ribs. "I have you," he whispered into her hair, his voice breaking. "I have you." A gunshot rang out from the top of the stairs. A bullet splashed into the water inches from Luca's leg. He spun around, shielding Hannah with his body. Novak was standing on the landing above, a silhouette backlit by the work lights from the upper floor. He was holding a pistol. "So romantic," Novak sneered. Luca's hand moved to his belt for his sidearm, but he stopped. Novak had the high ground. If Luca moved, Novak would fire, and Hannah was right in the line of fire. "Let her go." "Novak," Luca said, his voice deadly calm. "This is between us. It ends tonight, Vieri," Novak said, raising the gun. Luca looked at Hannah. Her eyes were wide, terrified. "Hold on to me," he whispered in her ear. Novak fired. Luca threw himself backward, dragging Hannah with him into the deep water behind the pillar just as the bullet sparked off the metal beam where her head had been a second ago. They were in the water now, trapped, Novak above them, the flood rising. And Luca Vieri realized with a chilling clarity that the only way to get Hannah out of this alive was to do the one thing he had promised never to do again. He had to become the monster she was afraid of. "Stay down," he ordered her, pressing her into the shadows behind the concrete column. He pulled his handgun from his shoulder holster. He looked at her one last time, memorizing her face. "I love you," he said. Then he turned and surged out of the water, roaring his defiance as he opened fire on the man above. The rain lashed sideways against the rusted corrugated metal of the warehouse, a relentless assault that echoed the night the levees broke. The wind screamed off the ocean, pushing waves of black water over the edge of the pier, threatening to swallow the docks whole. Luca Vieri moved through the storm like a shadow. He had brought only 3 men, Leo and 2 of his best sharpshooters. This was not an invasion, it was a surgical extraction. Novak was expecting an army, a loud, chaotic declaration of war that would draw the police and the press. Luca gave him silence. He moved along the perimeter of the warehouse, his boots making no sound on the wet concrete. A guard stood by the south entrance, huddled against the wind, trying to light a cigarette. Luca stepped out from behind a stack of shipping crates. He didn't slow down. One swift, efficient motion, a strike to the carotid, and the guard crumpled into the mud without a sound. Luca stepped over the body, his face a mask of cold, lethal focus. He didn't feel the rain. He didn't feel the cold. All he could feel was the terrifying, rhythmic pulsing of the dot on his tracker, telling him that Hannah was 20 feet below him, drowning in the dark. Inside the warehouse, the situation was dire. The basement level was a concrete tomb filled with the sound of rushing water. Hannah Reed was waist-deep in the freezing flood. The water was black and oily, swirling around her hips, sucking at her clothes, pulling her down. She was tied to a thick steel support beam in the center of the room. Her teeth chattered violently, a sound she couldn't stop, and her muscles burned from straining against the zip ties that bound her wrists behind the beam. She had screamed until her throat was raw. She had pulled until her skin bled. Now, she was just tired. The cold had seeped into her bones, numbing her legs, making her thoughts slow and sluggish. The water crept higher, inch by inch, a rising tide of inevitability. They are not coming. A voice in her head whispered, "It is too late." Just as she closed her eyes, surrendering to the darkness, a crack like a thunderclap echoed from the floor above. It was a gunshot. Then came the sound of glass shattering, followed by a heavy, wet thud as a body fell through the open stairwell door and splashed into the water 10 feet away. Hannah jolted, her eyes flying open, footsteps hammered down the metal stairs. Someone was coming. Luca descended into the basement like a force of nature. He was soaked to the bone, his black shirt clinging to his chest, his hair plastered to his forehead. He held a handgun in a 2-handed grip, scanning the shadows with predatory intensity. He moved through the knee-deep water near the stairs, trading fire with 2 of Novak's men who were taking cover behind a rusted generator. Luca didn't seek cover. He walked forward, firing with a terrifying rhythm. 2 shots, silence, 2 shots. The men behind the generator fell. Then, Luca turned. Across the dark, flooded expanse of the basement, his eyes locked with Hannah's. She let out a sob that was half relief, half terror. He was here. He was alive. But he looked wild, his eyes wide and burning with a mixture of panic and rage that she had never seen before. "Luca!" she screamed, her voice cracking. Luca started to run toward her, wading through the thigh-high water, his gun lowered. "Hannah, stop right there. Vieri!" The voice came from behind the concrete pillar Hannah was tied to. Novak stepped out from the shadows. He was a large man, his face twisted in a triumphant sneer. He had one arm wrapped around Hannah's neck, pulling her head back against his chest. In his other hand, he held a chrome pistol, the barrel pressed hard against her temple. Luca froze. He was 10 feet away. The water swirled around his waist. "Drop it," Novak barked. "Drop the gun, or I paint the walls with her." Luca didn't hesitate. He opened his hand and his weapon splashed into the dark water. He held his hands up, palms open. "I am unarmed," Luca said. His voice was steady, but Hannah could see the tension vibrating in every muscle of his body. "Let her go. Novak, this is between you and me." Novak laughed. It was a wet, ugly sound. "You think you can dictate terms to me? Look at you, the great Luca Vieri, knee-deep in sewage, surrendering for a waitress. You are weak. Luca, I always told you that caring about people makes you soft. It makes you easy to break." "I am broken," Luca said, taking a slow step forward. You win. You want the territory? Take it. You want the routes? They are yours. Just let her walk away. Hannah's heart stopped. He was giving up everything. His empire, his life's work, everything he had built to survive. No, Hannah choked out, tears mixing with the river water on her face. Luca, don't. Shut up, Novak hissed, tightening his grip on her throat. I am offering you a trade, Luca said, his eyes never leaving Novak's face. Me for her. You let her walk up those stairs, and I will stand right here. You can put a bullet in my head and dump me in the bay. No retaliation. My men will stand down. Novak paused. The offer hung in the damp air, heavy and tempting. To kill Luca Vieri without a fight? To take the crown of the city without losing another man? Do not do it, Hannah screamed, struggling against the restraints. Luca, please, I won't let you. Luca looked at her then. His expression softened, shattering the mask of the cold Mafia Don. There was only love in his eyes, raw and unguarded. It is okay. Hannah, he whispered, you are going to be safe. Novak grinned, savoring the moment. He slowly moved the gun away from Hannah's head, aiming it at Luca's chest. A deal is a deal, Novak said. Goodbye. Luca? He hesitated for a fraction of a second, gloating, enjoying the sight of his enemy defeated. That hesitation was his mistake. Hannah didn't think. She didn't calculate. She just acted. She threw her weight violently to the right, using the slack in her bindings to jerk her body sideways. Novak, caught off balance by the sudden movement, flinched. His finger tightened on the trigger reflexively. The gun went off. The deafening crack filled the basement. Hannah felt a sudden, searing heat tear across her shoulder, like a hot iron branding her skin. She cried out, slumping forward. Hannah, Luca roared. In the split second it took Novak to recover his aim, Luca launched himself through the water. He moved with explosive speed, a desperate lunge that covered the distance between them in a heartbeat. He tackled Novak, his shoulder slamming into the other man's chest with the force of a battering ram. Both men went down, crashing into the dark water. The fight was brutal and messy. There was no technique, no martial arts. It was a brawl for survival in 3 feet of freezing water. They thrashed and rolled, sending sprays of black sludge into the air. Novak tried to bring his gun to bear, but Luca gripped his wrist, slamming it against the concrete floor until the weapon slipped away and sank. Luca took a heavy blow to the jaw, tasting blood, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. The image of Hannah bleeding, tied to that post, drove him with a terrifying fury. He got a hand around Novak's throat and shoved him backward. Novak's head cracked hard against the steel beam Hannah was tied to. The sound was sickening. Novak's eyes rolled back in his head. He went limp, sliding down the beam and floating face down in the water, half conscious. Luca didn't check to see if he was alive. He scrambled onto his knees, splashing back toward Hannah. Hannah, he gasped, his hands frantic. Hannah, look at me. He reached for her wrists behind the beam. His fingers fumbled with the wet knots of the zip ties. I am okay. Hannah wept, her body shaking uncontrollably. It just grazed me. I am okay. The water was rising faster now, surging around Luca's chest as he knelt. He couldn't get the knot loose. He cursed, a raw sound of frustration. He reached into his boot and pulled out a combat knife. Don't move, he ordered. He sliced through the plastic ties. Hannah's arms fell free. Her legs, numb from the cold and the fear, gave out instantly. She collapsed forward. Luca caught her. He hauled her up against his chest, lifting her effortlessly out of the water. He wrapped one arm under her knees and the other around her back, cradling her high against him. Hold on to me, Hannah, he shouted, his voice cracking over the roar of the incoming tide. I have got you! Just hold on to me! He carried her toward the stairs, wading through the rising flood. Hannah buried her face in his neck, clinging to him with everything she had left. She could feel his heart hammering against her cheek, racing like a trapped bird. She smelled the gunpowder and the river water on his skin. But beneath it all, he smelled like safety. They reached the dry landing of the stairwell. Luca didn't put her down immediately. He carried her up to the main floor, away from the water, kicking open the door to the outside. The rain was still falling, but the air was fresh. He set her down gently on a stack of pallets, his hands trembling as they moved over her. "Let me see," he breathed, peeling back the torn fabric of her shirt to check her shoulder. It was a shallow gash, bleeding sluggishly but not deep. Luca let out a breath that sounded like a sob. He ripped off his own soaked shirt and pressed it against the wound. "I am sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I am so sorry. Hannah, I should never have left you alone. I should never have let you out of my sight." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her wet cheeks, wiping away the mud and the tears. "I thought I lost you," he said. "When I heard the gun go off, I died, Hannah. I swear to you, I died." Hannah looked at him. He was bruised, bleeding from a cut on his lip and soaked to the bone. He looked terrified. "You didn't lose me," she whispered. "You came for me, overwhelmed." She reached up and pulled his mouth down to hers. They kissed fiercely, desperately. It wasn't gentle. It was a collision of relief and terror, a need to prove that they were both still breathing, still there. Hannah's fingers dug into his bare shoulders, anchoring herself to him. Luca's hands cradled the back of her head and the curve of her waist, holding her so tight it almost hurt, as if he thought she might dissolve into mist if he loosened his grip for even a second. They broke apart only when the sound of sirens cut through the storm. Blue and red lights flashed against the warehouse walls. Tires screeched on the wet pavement outside. Luca pulled back, breathless, his forehead resting against hers. "Who is that?" Hannah asked, panic spiking again. "I called them," Luca said quietly, "before I came in. I gave them Novak's location. I gave them everything. Why?" Hannah asked. "You hate the police." "I am done." "Hannah," he said, looking deep into her eyes, "I am done living in the dark. I almost got you killed tonight. I am not losing you to this life. Not to Novak. Not to the water. Not to anyone." He stood up, pulling her to her feet and tucking her under his arm as the doors burst open. Federal agents in tactical gear swarmed in, shouting orders. Luca didn't raise his hands. He just held on to Hannah. "I am going to make this right," he promised her, "whatever it takes." The weeks that followed were a blur of lawyers, depositions, and sterile government offices. Luca Vieri, the untouchable king of Brighton Point, made a deal. It was the headline on every newspaper in the state, in exchange for full immunity for his lower-level men, the ones who had families, the ones who wanted out, and for himself. Luca handed over a mountain of evidence. He gave the feds the Novak syndicate on a silver platter. He gave them the corrupt city council members who had delayed the flood relief. He gave them the offshore accounts. He stripped his own empire down to the studs, dismantling the criminal machinery he had spent a decade building. It wasn't easy. There were days of grueling interrogation. There were threats of prosecution if he held anything back. But through it all, Hannah was there. She sat on the hard plastic chairs in the hallway, waiting for him. She held his hand during the breaks. She stood beside him when he walked out of the courthouse for the final time, stripped of his power but finally, truly free. He accepted a sentence of 5 years of probation, heavy asset forfeiture, and a lifetime of looking over his shoulder. But as he walked down the courthouse steps, hand in hand with the waitress who had saved his soul, he looked lighter than she had ever seen him. Epilogue. 6 months later. The summer sun was warm over Brighton Point. The city was healing. Scaffolding lined the streets of the Riverside district as construction crews worked to rebuild the homes lost to the flood. The air smelled of sawdust and fresh paint, replacing the memory of rot and mildew. On a high hill overlooking the bay, far above the floodplain, a small house sat surrounded by wildflowers. Hannah stood on the front porch, watching the clouds gather over the ocean. She was the director of the new Brighton Point Disaster Relief Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to helping families prepare for future storms. She was tired, but it was a good tired. A sudden rumble of thunder rolled across the water. The sky opened up, releasing a torrential downpour. Hannah froze. The sound of the rain hitting the porch roof was deafening. Water began to stream down the walkway, pooling near the steps. For a second, the green grass vanished, replaced by the swirling black water of the canal. Her heart hammered. Her breath hitched in her throat. The old panic, never fully gone, clawed at her chest. She gripped the porch railing, her knuckles turning white. Then, warm arms slid around her waist from behind. A solid chest pressed against her back. A chin rested gently against her temple. "Shh," Luca whispered. His voice was soft. It wasn't a shout over a raging storm anymore. It was a promise spoken in the quiet safety of their home. "I am here," he murmured, his hands splaying over her stomach, grounding her. "The water can't hurt you here." Hannah closed her eyes, leaning back into him. She felt the steady rhythm of his heart against her spine. The panic began to recede, washed away by his warmth. "Hold on to me," he whispered. She turned in his arms. Luca looked different these days. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by work boots and flannel shirts. He ran a legitimate construction company now, rebuilding the neighborhoods he used to rule. The haunted look in his eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet peace. Hannah wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her fingers in his hair. "I am holding on," she said. She pulled him down for a kiss. It was slow and lingering, filled with the certainty of a future they had fought for. The rain continued to fall around them, but it was just weather now. The flood was behind them. And whatever storms lay ahead, they would face them together, holding on and never letting go. "Thank you so much for listening to Hold On to Me," he shouted. "I hope you enjoyed this journey of danger, redemption, and love as much as I enjoyed writing it for you. It has been an incredible ride seeing Hannah and Luca find their way out of the storm together. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment down below and tell me where you are listening from. I love seeing how far our stories travel. And if you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Share your thoughts in English in the comments. Did you like Luca's redemption arc? What kind of story should I write next? Until next time, keep holding on.